Hey everybody, what is going on? It is Skye here from Real Mushrooms, and today we are talking about this. No, it's not a meteorite. No, it's not a piece of bark, and it's not a rock. For those of you that might not know what this is actually chaga. And chaga is actually a sterile canker that primarily grows on birch trees. And no, it is often referred to as mushroom, but we're going to get into that a little bit further, but it is definitely not a mushroom. So a lot of sites out there refer to this as a mushroom, and this is not a mushroom at all. This is a sterile canker that grows on the host tree. And so some might refer to this as a sclerotium. A sclerotium is a dense, pure mass of mycelium. So examples of sclerotium are poria or polyporus, or even the tiger milk mushroom. If you look that up, it actually grows a dense sclerotia underground. But this is actually not pure mycelium. So one paper estimates the mycelium content in this at only about 10%, and the rest of it being wood matter. So this is why chaga actually contains compounds from the birch tree, which is its primary host tree. So it contains betulinic acid and betulin. These are compounds that are actually found in the birch tree, and is why birch trees are considered medicinal. So the next time someone says chaga mushroom, just let them know that it's actually not a mushroom at all. So while the part that we actually harvest is a canker and not a mushroom, this organism still does have a fruiting body because it does need to propagate itself. And so when the host tree dies, the organism will actually produce a pore layer that is underneath the bark. And when the conditions are correct, the bark will peel away, revealing this pore layer, which is actually the fruiting body and does not look anything like a mushroom at all, that what we would think. It then has this rich spore layer that then releases into the wind, and then other insects will come by and they'll consume this pore layer and continue to spread the spores around the forest, which will then go and infect other trees, and then we'll get more chaga like this. One question that gets brought up a lot with chaga harvesting is whether or not this is sustainable. Can we keep harvesting chaga indefinitely? So one report that commonly goes around the internet is that there is one chaga that you might find on every 20,000 birch trees. This seems like it makes chaga feel like it's really rare. But this, when we dug into the sources, is actually not backed up by anything other than hearsay. There's one report out of Russia back in 2004, which looked at wild harvesting of chaga. They have very vast regions of birch trees down in Siberia. And what they found was that the chaga resource was abundant. And even with extended increase in demand, the supply could easily keep up. And this is similar to what the Finnish Forest Institute has said. So on their website, they say that in Finland and Sweden, upwards of 30% of all their birch trees are infected with chaga, with this organism. And so that is very, very different from 1 in 20,000 birch trees, which some of these internet sites might say. So from my perspective, chaga harvesting is actually quite sustainable. And what you need to remember too is that this is not the entire organism. The organism itself is actually living inside the tree. And when we are harvesting this chaga canker here, the organism itself is unharmed, and it is still living inside that tree, and it's still consuming that tree. And eventually it will produce the spore layer, which will then be able to propagate this fungus onto other trees. So harvesting this is not actually killing the organism. What we actually might see is if there's too much harvesting in certain areas, you will not be able to find chaga as easily. And that can in turn increase the price of chaga. So there could be a point when the chaga price actually becomes too expensive for supplements. But in the near term, I don't see that happening. On the topic of sustainability, one of the things that some people say is that we should cultivate this organism here and grow this chaga. And so this is actually happening in Finland, where they are inoculating birch trees and growing this fungus, but it actually takes 3 to 5 years to get the actual canker. So it's a very, very long-term project. Some people will say, okay, we can grow it in a lab, but growing it in a lab means growing the mycelium on a grain substrate. And as you might know from some of our other videos, that would be myceliated grain, where we know that the majority of that is actually the grain itself. And what we are missing too is that beneficial host tree, because the host tree contains those important compounds like betulin and betulinic acid. And if you don't have the host tree, you're not going to have those compounds in your final product. And this is similar for what we see with reishi when we want to grow it on wood. If it doesn't grow on wood, you don't see as many of those beneficial triterpenes. And this is also true with myceliated grain. Myceliated grain does not have that bitter taste that reishi mushroom grown on wood does. And that is partially due to the dilution with starch from the grain substrate, but it's also back to it just doesn't produce the same amount of compounds because it doesn't have high quality precursor materials to work from. So it's like any good recipe. If you don't start with high quality ingredients to begin with, your end result is not going to be good as well. So another fun fact with chaga is that it was actually used as a coffee substitute in World War II. Who would have thought? You know, we're drinking chaga coffee and chaga tea right now, but they were already doing that back in World War II. So in World War II, there was actually coffee shortages. And as we know, in Scandinavia, chaga is quite abundant. And they actually used that to make a coffee substitute that they could drink and stay warm out in those frigid temperatures while they were stationed out in the middle of nowhere. Another cool thing about chaga is that it can actually be used as a fire starter. Once you dry it out, the orange layer here, this can actually hold a coal and will burn very slowly. If you're familiar with the bushcraft, you can use fire pistons to actually hold your coal and then create a fire from it, which is really, really cool. So I hope you enjoyed these fun facts about chaga and hope you learned something. If you did like the video, make sure you comment down below, like the video, subscribe, do the rest of that stuff. And make sure you check out Real Mushrooms and hope to see you around. And feel free to ask us any questions, comments. We're here to talk mushrooms and hope to see you again soon. Cheers.